In today's video, I'm going to cover the whole entire market in terms of Dow Jones, Nasdaq, and S&P 500, including the economic calendar. Now, I do post these videos daily, so I highly encourage you to double check the latest video on my channel, so that way you get the most up-to-date information. And today, before I get to the technical analysis portion, I'm going to go over the economic calendar. And for Thursday, August 29, 2024, at 8:30 a.m., we have initial jobless claims, as well as advanced U.S. trade balance in goods, and as well as advanced retails inventories. And then still continuing from 8:30, we have advanced wholesale inventories, and then JDP second revision. Now at 10 a.m., we have pending home sales, and at 3:30 p.m., we have Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic speak. The thing is, though, one thing to note is for Friday, we have PCE inflation numbers coming out, and the Fed regards these as more accurate versus the CPI and PPI inflation numbers. They tend to look at more core PCE inflation numbers, but at the same time, sometimes based off the narratives, they just look at the non-core sometimes. The core PCE inflation numbers basically has energy removed from the calculations. And one thing to note too, NVIDIA, it's a heavy hitter, mega cap stock, so on and so forth. Reported earnings beat expectations, but not necessarily as much as the market was hoping for, and we have it drop down to $116 per share, give or take, for the most part after hours, and NVIDIA closed at $125 per share. So that is a decent hit for the markets. We have volatility index up 10.89% at 17.1 points, and essentially for the most part, where the market is at for the S&P, Nasdaq, and Dow Jones, they are almost at a pivotal point. The reason why I state that is because they could technically bounce at the levels they're at. At least this is what my opinion is. By the way, this is all just my opinion, so please do own due diligence and research before buying and selling. For example, what I'm looking at SPY ETF for S&P 500, so just same thing, just different ratio. And you could argue it's at the moving average right now, after hours, so on and so forth. So hypothetically, if NVIDIA opens up, mind you, it's at $116 per share, give or take, and starts rebounding to the upside, that could be enough to pull up the markets overall. And the Nasdaq and the Dow Jones are basically all at pivotal points where they could potentially bounce up to the upside. Now, if they do, then we can start going back up. But the indications for the market based off MEC lines, mind you, in case you're new to the channel, MEC lines are indication if we're in a bearish or bullish movement, and currently we're in a bearish movement, and they're indicating potential further downside. So what we could have is potentially, hypothetically, just to visually show, maybe a dead cat bounce potentially, and then go up. I'm doing a bad visualization drawing wise, and then come back down, maybe retest the moving average or whatever it might be, and then continue to the downside. Hopefully that's not the case. Potentially, if you're expecting the markets to go to the upside, mind you, for the long term, markets always tend to go up anyway, regardless. This is the whole entire chart for the S&P 500, essentially the SPY ETF, but still S&P 500. And ultimately, the market does go up for the most part, but we're talking about more for the shorter term and then short-term long-based kind of thing, right? So the question is, what is the movements for the time being? First, I'm going to go through the S&P 500, then the Nasdaq and the Dow Jones, so on and so forth. And again, looking at SPY, closed at $558.30. After hours, we're about basically 554, 553, jumping back and forth. Moving average could count as support at the 554 and some change. And ultimately, I'm going to cover the downside first. So if we do continue to the downside, I'm expecting potential support at the $550 price point range and some change. Reason being is, for example, there is a tick down on the downside right about here, and then there was some support and resistance levels horizontally around that same price point, so 550 and some change. And then the next level I would be expecting support is at the 548 and some change. Now the S&P doesn't swing that much. I would, in my opinion, expect that to be on the lower side. Now, if the market does get pulled down dramatically, which I don't necessarily expect, because they did, for example, NVIDIA did beat earnings. It's not like it didn't beat earnings. So that's why I'm expecting some kind of bounce up potentially to upside. But if you think all is doom and gloom, then you would be expecting to come down to these levels, which is about 545 and some change. And then if it's drastic, you see this consolidation right about here. Hopefully I can zoom in. Consolidation support, and that would be about 542 and some change, give or take. I don't expect to get to this lower level. In case you're curious, is about 538 and some change. But again, S&P does not move that dramatically, in my opinion. If it were anything, it would be the Nasdaq that would be moving dramatically, right? Now, if you're thinking on the upside in terms of resistance, I would be expecting this zone right about here to act as resistance, which is about 550, $557 and some change, but it wouldn't be stronger resistance in my opinion. It'd be more of the case within the zone 559 and some change, 560, because that collides with somewhat of a horizontal resistance I've seen earlier with the moving averages right about here. So $560 and some change, and then ultimately getting back to the all-time highs about 563 and some change. I don't expect to see this for Thursday's trading day personally, but if you're optimistic and you think the markets are going to reverse and go to the upside and test the all-time highs about 563 and some change, 563, 564 and some change, and then if you're counting the pre-markets and after hours, then it was 565 and some change. But again, I'm not expecting that personally, but that's just my opinion. Now, if we look at the Nasdaq, I'm looking at ETF QQQ, which is the ETF for Nasdaq, just same thing, just different ratio. You can see that, for example, ever since we tested the upward trend resistance line dating back to 2010, in case you're new to the channel, just to visually show what I'm talking about, here's the upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. Mind you, the market was still going up. It's just every time it went up, it got knocked down, went up, got knocked down. Did break through since 2020 to 2022. Came back underneath it, tried to test it again, got knocked down. I know I have way too many lines. I apologize for that, but some of them are still in play, unfortunately. So that's why I haven't removed them. But we passed it again as of recent of sometime in June of 2024, and then came back underneath it again, and we tested it, had a false breakout, but could not pass it multiple times testing it, and indications is pointing to the downside, which is unfortunate. But again, like I stated, if NVIDIA does bounce, so if we were to bounce, we could potentially, I should state first of all, we closed at $471 and some change, and we could technically bounce at the level we're at right now. There's horizontal some kind of support potentially, but it's not really that strong. It's at the $465 and some change. This is in the after hours, and essentially, in my opinion, because of the way Nasdaq moves and it's quite volatile at times, I would expect to bounce at the 460 and some change if you're expecting the bounce for the market to the upside. Now, if it goes down dramatically to the downside, which I think is a potential, we could start seeing support on the way down, but it could be a drastic drop. Potentially we could start going down to the $447 and some change, but it is quite dramatic. $447, it would be a pretty volatile day. Essentially, yeah, in my opinion, the 460 would probably be the bounce zone. So 460 bounce and then go back up to the 467, 465, somewhere between $465 to $467, and then come back down and close on the 460 and some change. I don't expect a massive drop down to the 448, give or take, $447, $448, give or take for the most part, and then get back into the zone that I've mentioned in the past before, which is about $433 to $448, I guess, on the upper end within the zone. Basically, you could see we came down, bounced support, resistance, support, resistance, support, resistance, so on and so forth, right about here. But I would expect that in multiple trading days, not just one trading day, just coming down to the zone. That'd be quite dramatic in my opinion, but anything is possible, I guess, right? Now, to the upside, in terms of resistance right off the bat, you have resistance at the $473 and some change because of the moving average right about here. Plus horizontally, we had support at the 474 and some change, and then the moving average 477 and some change. And then ultimately, if you're optimistic that this upward trend resistance line is going to be met again, then you're looking at $484 and some change. I personally don't expect to see that for Thursday's trading day unless NVIDIA starts going up to the upside like dramatically. The thing is, I should state that for NVIDIA shares and some earnings, they have gone down, but then the next few trading days they recovered and went up to the upside, and then ended up bouncing back fully. So be aware of that. And then because it's a mega cap stock, it could move the markets to the upside. So this could be just one or maybe two trading days of a drop and then get recovered for the most part, right? Again, the market is anticipating a rate cut in September, so that could be a catalyst for the markets to go to the upside. But again, you could argue it's priced in because the market is already aware of that, right? So there's that. Now for the Dow Jones, again, mind you, for the S&P, Nasdaq, and Dow Jones, they all are pointing to the downside. Plus, NVIDIA being a mega cap stock, technically getting pulled down. But you could argue, again, because the earnings was a beat, that it is a false pull down. Not a false pull down, but overstretched or overreaction in a way where it's going to bounce back up because, again, there was nothing really bad in essence. It's just the market wasn't satisfied for how much of a beat that they were expecting, you could argue. Now, for the Dow Jones, closed at 41,091 points, give or take. And you could argue it could bounce off the 40,750 points, give or take, plus by the time it hits the moving average. So 40,700 points, give or take, for plus or minus, and then go to the upside. And then on the upper limits, basically you'd be going to the all-time highs. I don't expect this to happen. It's about 41,400 points, 41,450 points. I don't expect to see that for Thursday. That would be the next few trading days if you're optimistic for the upside. We have to assess it day by day. But then more to the downside, you could potentially expect support off this upward trend resistance line / support level dating back since 2021. And you could visually see right about here. Now, if that's the case and you're expecting that, and then plus the moving averages there too, you're looking at about 40,500 points, 40,480 points, give or take, somewhere around there. And then ultimately, in my opinion, the lowest I would expect to see for Thursday is about 40,250 points, give or take. By the time we go down, maybe even 40,250 or 200 points, give or take, for the most part. I don't expect anything lower. If it were to be lower, it'd be 40,000 clean. But again, I'm expecting this moving average to hold because I'm not expecting crazy drops, but you could argue there's not much support on the Nasdaq side. So maybe the tech sector pulls down the market quite a bit because, again, NVIDIA is a tech stock, and then that massive drop pulling down everything, mega cap stock coming down, and then Nasdaq comes down, which is the tech sector, and then S&P has some of these tech stocks like NVIDIA and so on and so forth. And it could be a pretty crazy drop for Thursday, right? And we see volatility index increasing for the time being. So it could be a pretty crazy pull for Thursday, but we'll see. Hopefully it's not too drastic. But again, if you're shorting the market, then you're probably hoping it is. But again, for the long term, everything does tend to go up for the most part, but we'll see. That's basically it for today's video. If you found it beneficial, consider dropping a like. Thanks again for the support. I do appreciate it. And I do post these videos daily, so I highly encourage you to follow and subscribe so you get notified when I do upload the next videos. And thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. Take care. God bless and peace.